This is Holly Walker from the Brooklyn Arts Council. Today is November 8th, 2010, and we're working on the project Black Brooklyn Renaissance 1960 to 2010 for the Folk Arts Program of the Brooklyn Arts Council in partnership with Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation. Today I'm speaking with Jeffrey Perry, and could you spell your name for me?
Jeffrey, Perry.
Thank you. And where were you born?
I was born in North Carolina.
Okay, when did you come to Brooklyn?
I came to Brooklyn when I was 11 years old.
And what was the reason?
Well, we moved. We actually, picked up everything we had, and my mother and my three other brothers. We eventually, we came at different, different times, but it was basically we all moved the summer of, I believe, 1966.
Great. What neighborhood?
We moved to Crown Heights. I had an aunt who had moved probably 15 years, prior to her and her husband. So we, stopped there for a while. My oldest brother and I, lived in Pennsylvania during the summer and came back to begin school. I started in the 7th grade.
Okay.
And we had a one bedroom apartment, the four of us.
Wow.
And we shared all the four of us, the four boys. So my mother had all boys, so the four of us shared a room, had 2 beds and one, and we just we did that for that at least the first year. My mother slept in the living room. But we managed, and she got a job, and we moved to Bushwick area for a short period of time, for about a year and a half, as I finished junior high school and went into high school.
What high school did you go to?
I went to Brooklyn Technical High School.
Okay.
Down in DeKalb Avenue. But that was a long haul, but eventually we made it back to Crown Heights. In fact, we got an apartment under where my aunt lived. Because, they knew the landlord, and the landlord, when something was available, we were able to get it. From there, we did move to Queens. This was later. Mm-hmm. I was in my, I believe, 2nd or 3rd year of college. Went away to college. Like to mention, I played sports at Brooklyn Tech.
Okay.
Was co-captain of the football team. Went to the city championship and lost. Was also the vice president of the student government. And so I had pretty good grades and credentials. I was accepted into several schools, including 2 Ivy League schools.
Wow.
And I chose to go to Dartmouth College, where I went there, it was difficult. It was very difficult, even coming from Brooklyn Tech. I had one professor I met during my freshman year, English professor, said, you're not going to pass my class. And, unfortunately, he said that to 3 Afro-American people at the same time, 3 guys, and I was one of the guys. So when we didn't pass the class, we were able to protest and at least get him, reprimanded, and I believe they made him leave the school.
Wow.
But
So was that the only professor you had that did something like that, or was that pretty widespread?
Something like that blatant was not. I mean, it wasn't that. I don't think I've heard any other cases like that. There were some other professors you knew not to take their classes because they were particularly hard. They were difficult classes anyway.
Right.
So to have someone who may have a bias, you really wanted to avoid, if you could, if it was some way that you could get out of taking, that class, or taking a different semester with a different professor.
What year was this that you did
This was way in 70. I went to college in 1974.
Okay.
I didn't complete my college career until 1995, and I went through a long process dealing with different issues, basically of mental illness. You know, I lived in the shelter for a few years before moving to an adult home where I stayed. It seems like it was forever. Yeah. But I, eventually moved out into an apartment situation where I shared with other people.
So were you in the dorms when that happened? Originally?
Basically, I had some issues while I was in college, but basically it was after, or my final year, my senior year, I had a problem with using too much marijuana. I guess the anxiety of being a senior, whatever it was, I kind of stressed out completely.
That's a hard school too.
Yeah. And by the time I got home, I ended up failing a grade, and failing a grade usually, especially after that first suspension, the freshman year. That was the freshman year where I had a suspension because of the bad grade. I was taking pretty rough stuff, economics and math. And,
so were you an English major after that situation?
No, actually, I thought about English as a major, but my preference, was toward business. My father had a business in Harlem, and he was, kind of encouraging me to do something around business. So I majored in economics.
Okay.
The math was something I had a fondness for. The English, I thought about, well, I would say it's weird because English was not my best subject, although I was a good speller and did well in English. When it came to a lot of the traditional literature, it was okay, but when I considered myself writing, it was more of a personal transformation. It wasn't like I kind of copied or mimicked other writers. I just kind of wrote, and that was my understanding of it. Although, at Tech I took creative writing classes, and in college I took playwright, black playwrights. There's a course dealing with black playwrights, of course Hansberry, and there's Ed Bullins and a few other, and Vera Baraka, his famous play. And then.
So when did you go back to Brooklyn?
I got back to Brooklyn roughly in about 1985.
Okay.
I lived in, after coming back to New York from Dartmouth, my family had moved to Queens. My uncle, he was a professor at Medgar Evers, and he had bought a home, and we lived with, shared a home with him in Queens. So when I came back, we lived in Queens, which was different for me because I had always kind of lived in Brooklyn. So that's when I started having difficulties. Ended up getting actually kicked out of the house, told not to go back to the house. Ended up in Manhattan, and I moved from the Y to a hotel. Ended up on the Bowery. Ended up into the shelter system in Manhattan. All while dealing with what was, I guess, termed a nervous breakdown. So
your family wasn't very sympathetic to it?
They were sympathetic, but there was nothing they could do. And I actually feel lucky in a sense to get actually thrown out of the house under my own, for my own reasons. I mean, it wasn't anything they were doing, but because it made me kind of have to take care of myself. Because although I'd gone to college, I was very independent and outgoing or outspoken or whatever. I'd never really been on my own. So to live in the shelter and have to fend and have to really see myself and, away from my mother in particular, away from my family. I think at one point after leaving Queens, it was 2 years before I actually went back to see my mother, or was really invited to see her. I had a dispute with her, which led me to leave. But it was quite a revelation, really, to realize that I really had to take care of myself. And I think that was beginning of actually making progress in terms of picking up the pieces and putting myself back together.
Does that inform a lot of what you do today?
I believe it's the foundation of what I do today, which is actually I work as what we call a peer bridger, and that's within the mental health system, where as a former or as a survivor of the system, that I work with the inpatient population at one of the state hospitals in Brooklyn. Well, there's only one, Kingsborough Psychiatric Center, where I work as a peer bridger supervisor to help other persons with mental health issues to navigate the system and get back into the community. Is one of the biggest things we do, and try to get them to see their lives on a better scale, because I think things have changed. Even when I first was hospitalized while I was in Queens for about a week, the guy found out I went to Dartmouth and said, "Well, you don't have to be here," which was ridiculous. But I mean, it was ridiculous in the sense that I probably needed the services.
So was he unwilling to help you because of what he considered a higher class thing?
Yeah, he considered it, to be, and unfortunately, a lot of professionals or clinicians have that attitude. If a person, it's the same thing like we hear with movie stars, where if they're financially well-to-do or they're well-known, then there's not really anything wrong with you.
Right.
It's only a temporary thing. It's not something that really warrants their attention. But getting past that, I mean, I really talk about that part of my life a lot at Kingsborough and all around the city and the state, because there's a lot going on trying to deal with mental illness and the idea of people being able to recover from mental illness. But getting into my writing was something I'd always done most of my life since I was very young. Even in North Carolina, I wrote when I was I remember it when I learned how to write. I started writing poetry. At first, I think I was about I'll say 7 years old when I wrote a first something that I call a poem, and it was I know the title. It was called "Tell It to the Mountaintop."
Yeah.
And then in class I would showcase some of my writings. I would write little short stories. These about a giant who could run, who could jump from one planet to another and stuff like that.
So you continued to write even through high school when you were doing all those sports and things? Or?
Yeah. I would write in different periods or different increments. I would write like a poem once a month, or I could write 3 books of poetry or lyrics or anything for a length of time. But I began to what I would say seriously began to write for myself about about 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
Now, one of the things I found out that really inspired me was I had my grandfather had published a book of poetry, which I had a sense of. In fact, when I first got to New York City, my father, I was showing him, I just met him because he was, he kind of, I really didn't meet him until I was 11 years old, till we came to New York City. I knew his parents, I knew his brother, I knew his sister, I knew most of his family, but I didn't know him. And not even enough to recognize his, I believe a month before we had decided to leave, I saw a picture of him, a current picture of him. And when I met him, I was showing him my poetry, and he mentioned, well, his father writes this stuff, which was, my grandfather wrote very religiously in poetry. I have his book, which is his younger son had reprinted and given out copies. So I
Can you tell the name of the book?
His name was I guess his name as an author is G.A. Perry, and the name of the book is Inspiration, I believe the Gospel of Poetry, or something dealing with the gospel and it's I was just looking at it the other day because I wanted to get some more inspiration from him. Mm-hmm. That's the way I look at it. It was my inspiration once I got his book, and I was involved in a class where we started to write stuff. And I said, well, it kind of, everything kind of fell into place, and I began to write in the sense that there were pages of poetry that I hadn't written, or that I used to write. I used to write like that. So, or I would wake up in the middle of the night, or wake up early in the morning, and I'd have something to write. And most of the time, I would ignore those particular urges, or I'd just jot something down and forget about it. And then I said, no, what I'll do is start writing down everything. So I began first, I would just jot down a topic, and maybe later on continue writing about that topic. Then I began to write whole poems early in the morning. Then I had a whole book of, I bought, notebooks. That's what I used to do when I really was inspired when I was growing up to write. I would get notebooks of composition books. Mm-hmm. And I continued to write. I would continue to just write till I filled the books up. So I did that. I began to do that. This was about, roughly, 5 or 6 years ago. And I just continued to write till I had a big, drawer full of books, of written material. Then I said, well, I have to get this on the computer. So I started, playing with it, putting it on the computer, and
did you show this to anyone seriously? I mean, did you have anyone encouraging you?
Well, at that particular time when I began, there wasn't anyone encouraging me particularly. The encouragement was coming from my own, what happened was, I had that drive to write, just like when I was younger. I mean, I wrote and just had this stuff, and I would just have it, or I'd send it away and never hear from anybody again, or that type of thing happened quite often.
So these writings, were they more poetry, or was it stories, or was it kind of stream of consciousness?
It was mostly poetry. It's mostly poetry. Then so that was one of the things I wanted to do, to make sure that I had my own stuff. So I, did a little research. I sent away to a couple places that, they would accept the poem, and they would always send back, oh, this is a great poem, and we want you to, buy this book that we're going to put it in, $49, and we're going to give you a whole page or so. So I get the what they sent back, but I would never really buy the book from them. And then I came across a publisher. Well, they would call themselves a publisher, but it was, they said, we don't want your money, we want your book. And I was kind of taken by that. So I said, well, okay. And I went online and I submitted, like they just wanted, what's your basic idea and maybe a sample of what you were doing, and they accepted it. And then, so that became my first book of poetry, which was called The Positive Prime, a book of poetry.
Okay, great. When was that published?
That was published in 2007.
Okay, and what was the publisher?
It was published by Publish America, LLP or something like that.
Okay.
And I mean, it was a, you know, one of those things where you do your first book and you get the copies and I'm selling them to all my friends. Everybody is really, liking that. And so I felt I could even make some money off of this. So I started a second project, which was even more dynamic because the first book that The Positive Prime, I think when I first submitted, they said I needed some more poems, so I had to go and look underneath here and there and find scraps of stuff that I had written and the old stuff that I remembered, and I just, came up with.
Did you have a theme of the poems, or was there a consistent kind of theme, or were they all? What was the main topic of the book?
The main
theme.
The Positive Prime was actually one of the poems inside of the book. What I wanted to do in the poem, it was divided into 4 chapters. Basically the first chapter was dealing with the topic, I think I called it I Love America, and it was a black perspective of writing. I think the first poem was entitled Still Here, a Million Strong. I have copies of the book and some of this stuff I brought with me, but and then there was other sections, which was a poem I had written when I was very young called A Room Without a Wall. And it was really a nonsense poem, where it was like, what is a room without a wall? I guess nothing at all. If I should see a sight as this, I would run quickly to an analyst. But wait, don't be hasty. A story is this, he would think I'm crazy. Oh no, I didn't see it at all. Who sees a room without a wall? So that was kind of that theory of thinking out the box to me. That was kind of what I understood that, say 4 years ago. So the poems in that section was more like thinking out of the box. And then there was another section, Understanding the Universe, which was kind of spiritual and religious to a certain extent. A lot of it had religious overtones.
Did you say that was influenced by your grandfather's work?
Yeah. Well, it was influenced by, because I didn't really get into his work, because he was gospel religious. So he was very close to the Bible. I wasn't, verbatim with the Bible, but spiritual in a lot of ways. I had a lot of other influences. Spiritually, like Earth, Wind, and Fire, that was very. There were other, of course, all the Black Renaissance poets had a lot of influence over me. Traditional poets like Robert Frost and Walt Whitman, and the stuff I learned in high school and stuff like that. Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare's writing. So I had a pretty good base for writing and poetry in particular. So the last chapter was called Word on the Street, and it dealt with the homelessness, and it dealt with a lot of the issues of poverty and even dealing a little bit with the mental illness. Then, the second book was a lot more, went into it. Well, actually, the second book was called Conversations with a Soul Brother. and it went into like being Afro-American, dealing with America, and also dealing with that spiritual side or that religious side of being Afro-American, from the gospel, the spirit, the spirituals, coming through slavery, dealing with you know, being able to maintain our faith and our culture, you know, through everything. Now that's when things kind of changed a little bit after that book, because I have another uncle who during the 70s, you know, actually read poetry at City College and stuff like that. He got his PhD in philosophy.
Okay.
So he had, you know, seen my stuff, and he said, well, I really like what you're doing, except, you know, because, you know, I came from Dartmouth, so I was kind of arrogant about writing, so I thought all my stuff was perfect.
Right.
So he looked and he started to show me where I had, you know, typos and a lot of errors. So he said he would work with me, you know, as a, you know, to proofread and stuff like that. So I said, that's great, because I thought I knew so much I didn't need anybody to do anything like that. Right? Like you can actually correct yourself, you know. But so I've been working with him ever since, and I've done about 1, 2, and we revised Conversation with a Soul Brother, and I'm working on my next book now. I'm in about the middle of it, but I've done a book called Welcome Home, and it deals with you know, kind of the new millennium, 9/11, you know, like the consciousness of, you know, after 9/11, of how we have to really identify even as a nation to be part of, you know, the rest of the world. We you know, always been kind of elite, you know, the elite class, that we really weren't part of the world culture. And, you know, even with the internet and the global economy and the, you know, global culture, we're now a part, you know, and I think as part of, you know, our economic, you know, getting back to my economic roots, you know, it's part of our economics is to identify and understand ourselves, you know, in the world, not just as a superpower as we've always understood, and we kind of had carte blanche in terms of what we could do. Mm-hmm. But now other nations are a little bit stronger. Other nations are a lot more involved economically as well as socially. So we can't just kind of run in and do things with the CIA, you know, covertly do things and it's okay. So we have to kind of, you know, that's part of Welcome Home, but it also has a part in it where I talk about when I was in North Carolina as a little kid. Yeah. You know, so it, and I have stuff in there about my, you know, concerning my mother. For my mother, several poems. Or
how is she still alive?
Yeah, she's alive. She's living in Florida.
Okay.
My oldest brother lives in Florida. My youngest brother lives in Florida. My other brother lives in Atlanta. Okay. So I'm the only survivor from Brooklyn. You know.
So what made you decide to stay?
Well, actually, because of the, you know, having to, you know, kind of go to the shelter, you know, and make progress from that part. But I think ideally, I think I want to be in New York, particularly Brooklyn. I find where I live now in Lefferts Gardens, which is, you know, next to Crown Heights and next to Flatbush. So it's, you know, to me, it's like being home anyway. It's like being back where I was on Schenectady Avenue in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And there's a strong Caribbean population that I grew up with. So all my friends were, at least their parents were from the Caribbean. And now a lot of my neighbors, a lot of my friends, people that where I work at, is a huge Caribbean population. I've been able to go to Trinidad when I was in school. I went to Trinidad as part of a study program, studying actually the carnival and stuff like that.
Do you have any roots there?
No, actually, not in Trinidad. My uncle, the one who's helping me with the book, my editor, I call him. He's done our family, at least from his father's or my grandfather's, perspective. That's the other grandfather. And he's traced our roots back to I think somewhere in Nigeria.
Okay.
And then his brother is also I mentioned he's retired professor from Medgar Evers. Used to go to Nigeria, take students to Nigeria. So he has a deep root in Africa. So we have some understanding of, and I've met a lot of different people who I feel very comfortable with, from the continent of Africa.
So does that affect your writing?
It does, because, like I said, because of the global, the global, the World Wide Web, and what's the guy Thomas Friedman talks about the world being flat. That we're more in contact and on that level. So I do see, particularly with the West Indian, because we also go from our he's traced this particular relative from North Carolina to Barbados, and then to somewhere in
so you
Nigeria.
got a little bit of it there.
Yeah. And then when I meet Nigerian people, I feel so comfortable around them. And they just fascinate me to be with. I think that's part of what I'm doing now, and the book I'm working on is dealing with. It's dealing with myself as a writer growing up in terms of storytelling. And I think that comes from the African, in terms of that's what and also one of the things that I'm big on is that poetry to me is a product of a culture, and for us as African people, African American people in particular, not to have a strong, continuous hold on poetry. That's one of the reasons I like to write, because I feel that I can, from the perspective of going to Dartmouth, of a lot of different things in my life, I have a lot of perspective, and even the music that I grew up with, Now, if you talk about Brooklyn,